Hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And today I'm really, really thrilled to have Kristen Palson on with me. She and I, we were introduced to each other because I spoke at one of the events that she had for Simmons University. And I just immediately was like, oh, I felt the heart. I felt the care. I loved her leadership style. I just loved how she showed up. And so I had to have her on here. So welcome, Kristen.
Thank you. Thanks so much for those kind words. I felt very much the same way in the instant meeting with you as well. So I'm excited to be here, and I love talking about this kind of stuff. So bring it on.
So define what you think of when you think of leadership with heart. What immediately pops into your mind?
So certainly, if I was going to just distill it down, it would be somebody who's absolutely happy to lead with passion. So the passion comes from what are we doing and what's the mission behind what we're doing and why is it important? But it also comes from this really deep place for me about wanting to bring people together around something that feels meaningful. And it doesn't have to be to conquer the world or to save the world. It can be a smaller project, but it does have to have meaning. That I feel like that to me is where the heart really comes from. And that to me is where the fun really comes from. And I think there's a combination of fun and passion inside anything that's a leadership with heart enterprise or experience.
I love that. I hadn't heard that definition before, but I really love it. And so now I'll tell everybody now what are you up to? What do you do? What's your day job? And then what's the thing that just wakes you up every day about doing that particular role?
Okay, so I am very fortunate to oversee and run an Institute for Inclusive Leadership inside Simmons University. Simmons University is all women undergrad in the Boston-based campus, and we have graduate programs that are men and women. But really, the Institute's purpose and vision and the mission around what we do is really to help bring gender parity in leadership to a reality in our lifetime. And it's a lofty goal for sure, but every day I think we're making strides. I am incredibly fortunate to work with other women who are equally as passionate about it as I am. And my day to day is to oversee the processes and the operations and the people and the marketing and the messaging around those things. In addition, I also am the executive producer for our Women's Leadership Conference, that happens annually each year. This past year, where we had two, Heather, was our 45th anniversary. And I've been overseeing the Institute's and Simmons University Simmons Leadership Conference this will be coming up on my 5th year, actually.
Oh, wow.
It was very kind of a surprise baby, in a very beautiful blessing, but a very surprise baby. I joined the Institute at a time. So historically, Simmons has had corporate education and education certificate programs for women and for allies, and really about with the mission and the drive of helping women become more strategic and thinking more about their own professional development. That has always been part of Simmons University's offerings, is corporate education. And then the other piece of it, which obviously I just mentioned is 45 years running, is the Simmons Leadership Conference. The Institute as an entity and bringing those two components together is about 6 years old now, almost 6 years old. Right before, I would say a year before the pandemic, we kind of brought those entities together under one umbrella and thought about it more as an Institute for Inclusive Leadership with these offerings underneath it. When we did that, I was brought on to really be a product development, creative, innovative. So I think we had this buzz that there was something called a pandemic coming our way. And what happened was we were in the midst of that at a time when we were 5 weeks away from the Simmons Leadership Conference being an in-person event with almost 4,000 people coming to Boston, just under 4,000 people. So the team sort of said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Everybody around us was canceling. Everybody around us was sort of saying time out, with all really justifiable reasoning. I mean, nobody knew what was going on. And so the team kind of turned to me and said, what do you think? And the reason they turned to me is because in my first chapter at Simmons University, I oversaw Simmons Online. So Simmons online offerings, their graduate programming, and I was really one of the first people at Simmons to bring around this idea of more innovative ways to think about online offerings. And so that was really why I came to Simmons in the first place. I had developed a team, online offerings were off and running. They really didn't need me. They were super successfully going. And I was getting a little antsy because I tend to be the leader that's like looking for the next creative thing. And so I was getting a little antsy. The current president realized that, tapped me for a few strategic projects, and then said, hey, I'm thinking of starting this institute and I'd like you to be part of it. So that's how I got to the Institute. And then when the pandemic hit, I had the online experience and everybody looked at me and said, what should we do? And I said, we should convert the whole thing to online. I said, it's not going to, it's a Herculean task, but it's very doable. And I sort of had an immediate vision for what that was going to mean, because everybody, like I said, everybody was canceling for all good reasons. And I said, okay, here's what I think we could do. Well, in 5 weeks, we converted 3,800, 3,900 people coming to Boston to more than 6,000 people joining us online all day, all day. I mean, think about it. We were desperately thirsty for connection. We were all very scared in ways that were where connection was more important than ever. And we created a space for women, especially, to just bond around being inspired and feeling like there was still lots to be energetic about and lots to be hopeful about. It was a whirlwind. I mean, talk about a project of a lifetime, because it's just crazy town when you think about it, because we started that global pandemic thinking like, oh, in a couple of weeks, we'll be in a video studio together doing this. Oh, in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to create studio hubs around the country to bring our speakers to. Oh, so, you start out with a plan A, then you go to a plan B. Well, I think when we actually went live, we were at like plan W, like not quite Z, but I was like, oh my gosh. And talk about an incredible team and an incredible, like, amazing, energizing effort to get us to a place that was incredibly well celebrated by both our customers and our clients, our friends, our own internal team, the speakers that came, and everybody came in virtually. And like I said, it was incredibly successful and fun. But that's how I got the conference baby. And again, just such an amazing blessing, like a story like none other, in a time when things were shutting down and people were closing down and stepping back. I feel like I was leaning in harder than I ever had in a way that was so energizing and so exciting. I was incredibly fortunate because I am a single mom by choice. And at the time, my daughter was only 3. And my sister and my brother-in-law came to me at the beginning of the pandemic and said, let's quarantine together between our 2 houses. Thank God, because if not, I would have been home with a 3-year-old by myself trying to manage this big project. But instead, I had the resources of my sister and my brother-in-law, their 2 children who were homeschooling. So we mixed and matched like who was going to stay at what houses and how it was all going to work. But it was one of the most exciting experiences in my sort of leadership journey that I have ever had. And the conference has fortunately evolved into something that we've been able to come back together, but we've stayed hybrid because that has become really clear that I think women really want choice. I don't think it's that we don't want to come back together. I think it's that sometimes there are reasons we just can't. And so this idea that we've maintained a hybrid offering and given people the choice to come join us in person or be with us all day online, realizing like how to include both audiences without feeling like you're being othered or without feeling like you're missing out is really important to me. And that's like a driving evolution of this conference, because I feel like it's every year I'm like, I'm going to do it a little better, and I'm going to get a little better at finding the nugget of engagement that keeps people really connected. And I've been incredibly fortunate. I have really good players around me, incredible speakers who are willing and interested in being part of the day. And, for me, it's like just so rewarding. So that is the other big piece of what I do at Simmons at the Institute.
Oh my gosh, love it.
So I'm really interested in projects and in opportunities that allow me to use like both sides of my brain. As you can probably hear, I have like lots of creative, lots of innovation, lots of that sort of energy in me, but I'm nothing if I'm not practical. I'm nothing if I don't love a project plan, and if I don't like a financial spreadsheet that makes sure that I'm buttoned up over here. I don't do as well as a leader when I don't see sort of the boundaries in which I need to play. And then in spite of that, I feel so free. So
Very interesting. Yeah,
that to
it's
me
well,
is
I like
like,
as an entrepreneur, like for me, as like and it's small little business. Um, I do find that if I like I have someone who helps me with my marketing, kind of marketing project management, and it does help me go, okay, so like look, we're following along. Okay, great. We know we have these as our like even though it's my business to have that person who says, okay,
yeah,
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like because I am more of the visioning, bigger picture person. And so I don't always go, what are all the little details or what are the X, Y, the tiny, tiny little dots that have to be done ahead. And so having somebody on the team that does that, but what I find interesting is having kind of like what you were saying, even though it's my own business, having that someone there that's on the team that actually happens to be very like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then sub A two is helpful for me because
mhm,
otherwise we would not achieve what we achieve, you know?
yeah.
So I
Well,
totally
everyone
get
needs
it.
sort of like, and no one wants to think of it as boundaries because everyone wants to
Mhm.
be creatively free. But I actually find my own brand of creativity or innovation does so much better with a few, even if they're dotted lines, but just a few
Mhm.
lines around how to think about this. Then within that, I feel like
Have
then I
fun.
could try tons of things and have lots of fun. But I will say that it's not that common that I meet people who are as sort of buttoned up around the A, B, C, D of it and want to
Yeah.
really run in the space of like, let's have fun and let's fool around and let's figure it out. But it brings out the best in me as both like an individual contributor and I think as a leader. I think it makes our team and our projects just, more fun. They sing a little bit more because I think nobody feels like we're coming up with ideas that are just not grounded in the vision or the mission of where we're heading.
Mm.
So
So I
that's,
am curious. Well, I'm curious to know the people that like report to you through like this. You have all this stuff you have to do at the institute. How would they describe you as a leader? Like, what would be words they use to describe you? You know?
so it's funny. I actually took the liberty of asking a few of them because I was like, how would they describe it? And it was very, very humbling, I will say, and very honoring because they said creative and innovative were on the top, but very strategic
Mm.
and very inclusive and very fun. They said there's something
Oh.
about what comes out in me as a leader around
Mm.
this idea that like when I'm bringing my heart to the table and I'm bringing my creative energy and I'm bringing my humor and my sense of self that sort of um I tend to be like kind of how I am right now. Like I am very much myself on whether I'm in the boardroom or whether I'm cooking dinner at home or whether I'm in a casual meeting. I don't I'm not very good at
Mm.
showing up as a different me. And I'm fortunate that I haven't had to. And I get that that's actually a blessing. And not everybody has that same experience. But I think this idea that my team sort of said to me, your ability to bring the fun makes all of us not only have more fun, but I feel like I am asked to bring my best self or the things that light me up. And those contributions are just as valuable or they become part of the mix in a way that brings us all to a better place.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, I can tell when I'm not doing it. That's for sure. I can tell when I'm like spinning on my own frustration or I'm bogged down in too many numbers and not enough creative or vice versa. And that's been a real lesson that I continue to learn, I continue to evolve into. Because I think what's the worst is when you have a leader like me who is willing to sort of say, this is also going to be fun and we're going to find a way to get to this place together in a creative way. But when I start to spin on some of the things that either bring up my own anxiety or trigger me, I can tell that is equally as pervasive, like that is equally
Mm.
as catchy. And so I've worked really hard to see those things as soon as possible and call myself out on them in front of my team And I have stopped whole projects in the midst of what feels like crunch time to say, time out. I can see what I'm doing. I can see how it's affecting you. We need to pause. I did this one meeting right before the conference, not the pandemic year, but the year after. And I was, justifiably anxious about the fact that we were trying in a new way again. And I was excited, but scared. And I could tell that I was just not coming to these meetings or to the project as my best self. And I said, let's just pause because I can see what I'm doing in myself. I brought everybody together and I said, we're not going to talk about the project. We are going to popcorn around and you're going to pick anyone. We're not going to assign it, pick whoever you want and make a comment or talk a little bit about what you've seen in that person over the last couple of weeks that have helped move this project forward or have helped you personally or have helped you see something that you might not have seen before. And it was incredibly powerful. And it only took I believe it or not, I really don't have a huge team, even though we do huge things. So, at less than an hour later, we had a team that had kind of recalibrated around what I think were actually the most important things, which was the stuff that I think is very heart driven around why we are where we are, why we're doing what we're doing, but why is Heather making an impact? Why is Kristen making an impact? Why is Susie making an impact? It wasn't, and how is that? And it's funny, again, I didn't assign anybody. Everybody found a way to make sure everybody was included in a really personal way. And we took the information, we put it on a little Post-it, everybody kind of wrote it down, what was said about them. So in the next 2 weeks, when the swirl kind of elevates again, you have that to reconnect to. And to me, that was like a huge learning opportunity for me. It might have also been an opportunity for them to learn, but it was such a great reminder that with all this energy and all of this kind of enthusiasm, if it's not like channeled in a way that's really positive and productive, you have to keep it in check. You have to see that early and often. And I'm also very clear about communicating that. I say, this is how I can tell I'm showing up and I don't like it. And I don't want to put that on anybody, especially you guys, my team who is doing these powerful things and these impressive things. Let me say to you, I noticed this in myself and I'm really sorry. Or I noticed this in myself and I can do better.
What I loved about it is, well, number one, there was this high level of self-awareness that was there and social awareness to see the impact of what was happening to the other people based upon how you were feeling inside and what you were kind of putting out as far as energy. But then I loved how you kind of like opened up the envelope and kind of turned it inside out and to say, now let's like reflect back the goodness of each of you and how you've made us get to this amazing point so far, and then how that now contributes to us going forward. It really does flip the script. And forces us out of the cycle of victimhood, blaminghood, fear, like all the things that you may be thinking that kind of stops us. It really kind of jolts to say, okay, now let's restart fresh again. So I just love that, the way you do it. And I think it provides a really good tool for those who are listening now and for me too, right? To say, when I get to the point where I'm stuck and I can feel it and I can see it, what's one more tool I can access? That whether it's for me and my family, whether it's for me and people in the community, whether it's for me and a team I lead by managing others, what's the way that I can kind of restart us or like jolt us? Or I call it a trigger or a turning point. And there's like always some kind of like thing that does this and a turning point of a decision I have to make. And so I think we have, as leaders, we have a lot of these. I mean, whether we recognize them or not, you were obviously more emotionally aware to see it and then to do something about it. Not everybody is as emotionally aware or they're emotionally aware, but they're not prepared to go do something about it. So that combination is what makes you successful. Hence, which is why you're on the show. I knew it. Like I knew you were, and I always say like, this doesn't mean like you're perfect, I'm perfect. It's not about that. It's like it's a journey, but the faster we can get to that self-awareness and the faster we can get to the social awareness of saying, what's the impact of me and what's happening around me, the faster we can move us and our teams onto a more productive place. So I appreciate that this example is very specific, and
Yeah.
it does give me and others a tool to kind of move past those tough places.
Well, and I would also say if people do want to pick it up as a tool, it does not take very long. It doesn't require much of, I mean, it requires an emotional strength for you and your team members, and psychological safety for sure. But I didn't prep. I didn't, it wasn't, and it was the perfect pause to get us to a place that was so much more powerful afterwards.
What I love about it too is, so there's this vulnerability that's there, and there's this humanness that's there, which, by the way, I mean, those are the kind of leaders people want to follow anyway. They don't want to see people who are pretending to be somebody they're not. The part of you that says, like, I don't even know how to be anybody other than me, and like, this is what you get, whether it's good or bad, like, this is what you're getting. Again, another reason why I absolutely adored you from day one. And so I think it's extremely important, because I think those who put on airs are going to keep that distance between them and the other people, which will, by the way, always limit their effectiveness in the long run anyway. So you're willing to dig in, even things get really bad, and you needed to be like, this is not going down a good road. The team's willing to dig in with you because you've already gone through you've already done the hard things, right? With admitting you're wrong
Definitely,
and all
like,
that.
the foundation was there for that to be as successful as it was, which is not really, I'm just a piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
I am not the foundation. I'm a piece of that foundation in many ways, but it's, and I do think that the people who are working side by side with me in the Institute are also there because they feel so passionately about what we're doing. And that certainly helps. And I get that not everybody is in, a position where the vision or the mission of where they're working is exactly in line with their personal, hopes and dreams. But I mean, I couldn't love what we do more. I mean, think about it. Like, if we could even move the needle a little bit on having gender parity in roles and leadership roles, in my lifetime, in our lifetime, I mean, think about what that would mean for really not us in many ways, but in the women that are coming, next. And then,
Absolutely.
So
I love that. Yes. And I love the fact that you have, because I do believe, I found, obviously I speak for so many different companies at different areas, and not all of them have this, like, or necessarily for you, it has such a sexy mission, like, this mission is really, you're just a very amazing mission. But sometimes it's like, I work for a plumbing company. Like, sometimes I work for a tech, whatever that might be. And it's like, I always believe there's a way to find that mission driven focus, whether it's like serving a customer in an amazing way, or if it's an internal thing, it's like the internal people, like, what are you doing to make those people feel seen and heard? Like, whatever it is, there's always this way to find a mission in the work to be done. It may be that it's not the organizational mission, but it's your mission in the team, or whatever it might be, right? And so the more we can find that, the more all of us can get up to in the morning. And if we can help our people find that little sliver of, like, that mission for them, no matter where they work, I just feel like it makes all of our work much more fulfilling if we can do that as leaders. So it's just like, yeah, kudos to you, because you have it, but then at the same time, continuing to recenter them on that, your team on that, and recognizing when you're not showing up as your best self, and then kind of, I just bringing everybody into the mix and revitalizing the whole mission you're on is amazing. I am curious to know, has there ever been a time, can you think of a time, and maybe a specific story you can share with listeners? This is really where the learning takes hold, where maybe you didn't show up as emotionally and socially aware as you did maybe in the moment you just described. What was happening in that instance? And then what did you do to, kind of, what was the turning point for you to come out of it more enlightened?
Oh gosh, I feel like those things happen on a daily and weekly basis where you're like, oh, that wasn't my best. I think this is probably going to be more broad than a single story, but I sort of have always shown up big. I show up, I have a lot of life and a lot of personality. And I think I've had a lot of people in my, mentors or bosses or people who have been coaching me along the way who have kind of warned me about making sure, like, I have someone, for instance, who says you're like 5 is most people's, like, what is most people's 10, and your 10 is like so scary or so, so I think for me, calibrating of that and finding, because I think there was always a part of me that didn't love that feedback, not because I didn't wasn't true, but because I felt like, well, how do I be my authentic self? That's who I am. And how do I show up as less than, or how are you asking me to show up as a smaller version of me? Which, that doesn't feel good for anybody, especially a woman, who's like making her way in her own professional journey. And I think the biggest nugget for me in learning around that was, it wasn't that I needed to show up smaller. It was that I needed to help calibrate more quickly around where are the people at that are around me, and how do I get to where they are and sort of bring them to where I am. So if they're not ready for my 5, then maybe my 2 or 3 is kind of where they're at, and I can take them from a 2 to a 3 to a 4 to a 5 in a way that feels really much more responsible and a little bit more respectful of everyone involved. And it wasn't about making myself different than who I am. It was about just, I don't know, something as simple as like reading the room and listening a little bit more and doing all the things that I think we know are really important, but if you're not deliberately practicing them, they can get away from you fast, and especially I think in the beginning of my career, I felt like I didn't know how to calibrate that as well as I've evolved into. It's still a work in progress, let's face it. But I do think that the idea now is not about making myself small, but it's rather about seeing where I am in relation to others and making sure that that feels like I'm meeting them where they're at, to get them either to help me get to the next place or to help us together to see where we're going and be more motivated to get there. I can tell you that anyone who's worked with me for long enough, let's say, I don't know, 6 months or a year in that sort of time together, I can be at a 10 and they're fine now. You know what I mean? I can be much more of the sort of bigger and more excited personality that I probably tend to be normally or on a day-to-day basis, especially with the projects that I know we're working on together that are super fun, like the conference.
I am
But it
curious
was
to know.
hard to learn that. And it's still hard.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was there ever a time that your real big way of being and thinking caused some kind of conflict on is there a particular one that pops in your head where it's like, oh yeah, this was an issue?
I think it tends to be, well, there was a time when I was working with another leader, and I was very direct and very strong in my assumptions about the project and my feeling about where we needed to go. And the way in which I was voicing those things was really direct and really succinct. I didn't color it a lot with much empathy or much of the things that I would have lightly and more gracefully presented where I was coming from. I don't know that the delivery of what I was saying would have been, the actual data, the actual communication wasn't untrue, but how I put the words together and how direct I was really backfired. We ended up in a really bad situation where she was really offended. I was really offended. It triggered her. It brought out the worst in her. We had like what felt like a very, almost like a personal fight. I mean, it was, and that's just not very common at work, but it's also not how I like to roll in my life. Like I'm not interested in having a fight, but I do think that it was really hard. And then I said, I really love this person. I really respect her. I felt very strongly that we were going to continue to work together and I wanted to. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to walk away from this because it's not worth it. It was so worth it to me. So I'm like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to navigate what feels like a really difficult, really icky situation that, quite frankly, I did a really big part in bringing on. And so I was embarrassed and I felt like I felt like I knew better, and yet I acted poorly. And so I went back to her, and I gave us both like a chance to take a breath personally. And then we had probably one of the most powerful conversations between me and another leader, where I just said how sorry I was and how embarrassed I was. And I gave her some examples of times when in that conversation when I just felt like it got away from me, and I did know better. And she did the same. To her credit, it was a very powerful conversation on both sides. And we came out of it not perfect and not, still both, we still both have a lot of passion for what we do in ways that sometimes trigger each other. But I think that we're so much better at mitigating like that we're going to go off the cliff piece, and staying in a place where we can breathe and recenter and speak both to each other and to ourselves a little bit more kindly, and a little bit more from a place where you're like clear. And so much of this, I don't know, this is how I believe, so much of this is part of who we are, much broader than any one position or any one leader or any one boss that we might have had. There's so much that makes up how we become a leader and what kind of leader we become. And I think that, one of the things that was really honored in my family was kind of owning both good behavior and not so good behavior, and being humble about it. And I think that to me feels really important in how I learn and how I communicate when I mess up. Like I think for me, it's really important to say, I'm really sorry. I can see what I did wrong and it wasn't good. And I know why that triggered me. And I know why sometimes it doesn't sound very empathetic. And I'm really sorry. And I've shared a lot of that kind of family stuff and the things that make me who I am. Not to provide an excuse for bad behavior, because that's not okay either, but more to help the partner or the other person in the conversation know me better and know what happened and how did it spiral. Still a work in progress. Still working on some of that, but
I think we all are. Like that's
yeah.
the whole point, is that we're all works in progress. People who listen to the show know this is not. I'm not trying to say like these are all and we are all examples of perfection. That would be 100% lying, and it's just not. But I think it's there's one of the things that I'm coming to as I'm writing this book on self-leadership now, which is kind of a part of the caring leadership body of work I do, is this idea of like, when we think about self-help, when we think about all of these things that we're writing about, there's two things that are going on. One is the message that underlies a lot of this stuff of like get better, improve, is that maybe we're not good enough to start with. And so that we always have to try to get better. We always have to get better because we're just not good enough. And I struggle with that because I don't believe that to be true. I think that like I personally feel, based on my faith journey, that we were here for a reason and we show up how we are for that reason. And we're like put together the way we are for that reason. And so that does make us good enough from the scratch, from the start. And then there's this part of me that says, but like, how much better could our relationships be? How much more fulfilling could our life be if we just did a tiny bit more? Like if we just did a little bit more. And so it's kind of like, yes, I think that like we are great and good like we are. And then there's this thing that says, gosh, in my mind, it's not like how much better can I be for me to that extent. It's kind of like how much more could I get? But like how much more would life just be better for us in the world? Like the global kind of, if I did committed to X, Y, Z. And I think that's kind of what I believe in. So like when we talk about these things, it's like, you were in that particular example earlier where you were more aware, and then you helped that kind of, like I said, turn the envelope inside out, or kind of turn things on its head and have the team look another way. And it was like, wow, in that moment, the example of what you were to those people around you how much more fulfilling their work experience was because you stopped, paused, recognized where you were at, how you were impacting. And it was like, so it's not like you weren't good enough and like how you showed up isn't good enough, or like the way that you're big isn't good enough. But it was like, but how could like more people's lives be more fulfilled if
Well,
we more intentionally did these things? And that's what I like
exactly.
about this, you know?
Well, and I do think we're at a point in whether this is part of where we are in the world today or what, but we're yearning for like more of that community. Like there's definitely community that we create if we are intentional about it, but more and more it's hard work because we're connected by devices and we're connected by computers, and we're less in person, personal relation with one another, even when we want to be, even because people are falling back on the things that are just more convenient sometimes, like a quick text and things like that. But I do think that being super deliberate, and think about it, we spend so many hours together in work and with the people that we're working side by side. It's funny, this year I said to each of my teammates individually in our like part of our performance conversation, which is like an ongoing conversation throughout the year, I brought up love. And I said, how do you feel if I used the word love? Like I wanted to kind of check in with my teammates before as individuals. And I said, you don't have to answer me now if you're not comfortable, but like there's so much about what you do for this team or so much about what you bring as a person that I absolutely love. And I would love to be able to say that, but I don't want to use that. I mean, that word is hard for some people and that word is loaded for some people. And I wanted to be responsible about it before I started using it. So I did the sort of individual conversations, and I was really fortunate because my teammates were all totally open to it and so frankly, what I then went to is like a team meeting and said, you're probably going to hear this more. I'm just putting it out there that I'm going to say the word love in these meetings in ways that when it's appropriate, and I've said, oh my God, I love you. And I love this that you're bringing. And I love this that you're doing. And it's not just about what, but about who and loving them. And I feel like it's that magnifies. I see that magnifying when we start to let love in much more of a deliberate way, not in a way that feels like it's infringing on something that it shouldn't, but just acknowledging that being in community together and working so closely together, it's okay for us to celebrate that with our hearts.
You're speaking my language, lady, right? I'm just
Well,
feeling this at such a deep level. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. So now we're at the time of the podcast where now like you kind of become the host. So you get to now ask me any question that you would like or something that comes to mind, and I'll answer it the best I can.
All right. So of course, because I couldn't help myself, I like prepared and I have a few different questions. So we can stick to one. But I think this one's very broad. So if you want to do something more specific, we certainly can try a couple. But what do you see as the biggest challenges for leaders in the next decade?
I think this idea of, particularly because now we're seeing much more, hybrid work. I was talking to one of my team members who was like, I really dislike the idea of working, hybrid, never want to be in an office. And so I think this concept you brought up in this exchange you had with the team on self-awareness, social awareness is just going to be more and more heightened. And so I think leaders, the biggest challenge we're going to have is their need to pause a lot more, to be paying attention to what they see on the screen, to be paying attention to all the like unspoken cues and the things that are just there in emails or not there in emails, and to say, how am I going to respond to this? Am I going to ignore it like most other people do? Or am I going to pause? Because so what makes us so different than kind of like the robots, the AI, all these, right?
Yeah.
It is in these like small micro moments of interactions that we have with people that are going to be the biggest differentiators. You could train AI to do a lot of different things. And I do feel like this thing that says, I'm aware and I'm going to respond. Like I recognize and I'm going to do something that builds a bridge that doesn't break it down I'm going to build something that feels super ultra human, which could be like very vulnerable, which could be like this stuff you're talking about with love. This stuff that says, well, what does love really mean? How does it show out at work? I feel like those are the things that in this next decade, the leaders who really hone in on that are going to be the ones that are going to stay, because people are just going to be like, how could we cannot let them go. We could not replace what this person, this human, is bringing to the table for our team and for our organization. So that's what I think is going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah, I really think you're right on so many levels. I think we're going to let AI and let technology do more of the things that are, but it's going to be so much more powerful and so much more important to make sure that it's got a connection between the people and those who understand that and see that. And like you said, it's a work in progress. So you're honing that skill, but those are the people that you're just, you're going to find and you're not going to want to let go.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Exactly. Did you have something else pressing?
I'm like, do you want me to ask another?
You look like, okay, I'm curious.
I know. I was like, well, I have another one that's a little bit more. So when you're working on a really hard project or leading something that's really important or that you're really passionate about, how do you also manage the idea of sharing sort of up and out aside from like the team that you feel so passionately about and or the project that you feel so passionately about? We're always hearing as women that we need to build our network and we need to have a board of advisors and we need to have, and I will tell you, I'm the first to admit that I feel like that is definitely not my sweet spot. I have lots of great people who have sponsored me and mentored me, and I'm very fortunate in that way. But I'm not very good at the up and out that I think you need to do, especially as you're growing in your professional journey. And I'm just wondering what kind of advice you have on that.
Well, I would have to tell you it's not a strength of mine either. I am an only child. You probably know, a little bit of my backstory, but because I'm the only child and had to deal with being almost like the adult in my home for many, many years. And so I have this high level of self-reliance. So I would say in the last 10 years, I've gotten a lot better at saying, okay, Heather, but like it's like you're done relying only on you, or you're done being your own personal board of advisors all by yourself. You need to reach outside. So I haven't had any formal mentors. I've had people where I do kind of take their advice, or I watch from a distance. I mean, I research. But now I am saying, okay, it's time for me to kind of go be a part of this women's group, or go be a part of it. I'm making myself go against my natural grain. My natural grain is self-reliance. My natural grain is to and I've gotten quite far all by myself, to be honest. I had to, it's just the way it was. But it's like, if I want to either professionally, and I'm not even sure right now, I'm trying to go further professionally, because I where I'm at age-wise and where my kids are at, I think professionally, I'm happy. It's kind of like, but from a human development perspective and a friend, like, personal development perspective, just friendships and things, what are your next steps? And so that's where I'm trying to extend I'm focusing on being a better friend. I'm focusing on being there more for people than I was before. And then I'm just focusing on like, what do I do that extends outside of me, but it's not necessarily to get something. Like, I think I'm past that point. Like, the getting might be like, I want to fill myself up. I want to be with other people. I want to be in community. But it's not necessarily like I'm looking to do this to get another business thing or something, or to get a lead. So I think that's where I'm at now. And I do feel like I'm being more intentional. I'll be 53 this year. And so that level of intentionality is more about friendships and community than it is about getting. It used to, but I mean, these last years of development have been more about like, how do I get that lead and how do I do that? But I'm kind of past that point now. So I think, just saying, yep, how do I be more intentional? And while I'm not really necessarily looking for a mentor or coach, which I've had coaches before, I think right now it's like, just how do I find community? How do I find more women who are like you? It's just that kind of thing where it's like, you just feel like we're like, oh, I love you, and it's just that way. And I think that's what I'm looking for now. Yeah.
Well, and I'd like to think that that's actually how you build a network, whether it's a personal, professional, or a little bit of both, that actually has value and that actually, sort of feeds you and you feed it in ways that feel like, I think for the beginning part of my career, I was always like, networking, you have to be networking. And that's just, I mean, I turned 50 this year, and I sort of feel like you get onto this sort of thinking of like, how do I want to show up in the world, and how do I want to build a community around me that shows up that both feeds me and that I can feed.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of reassuring to know that from someone like you, it's not about like building that same network that you might have thought you needed to build when you were 25 or 30 even. But in fact, sort of nurturing who you are through the relationships you have and the community that you build around you. So
I love that so much. So much goodness there.
fun.
For those who are listening, because they've got probably already taken away of this, but when you get to this point, you're like, whew, there's already a lot of great nuggets that Kristen shared. But what might be maybe a couple pearls of wisdom? Some things as we think about maybe people listening in, they're either going to be high potential, those who are looking to lead, those who are looking, they're probably leading at least one person, so they're probably managing different people, or they just have an aspiration to be someone who shows up with more influence. What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you would leave them with today?
I think, like, for me, showing up as your authentic self is sort of number one. That to me feels like the baseline of how you're going to move through the world more successfully. And really better understanding your authentic self is a lifelong journey, but worth taking. And then I think mix that in with as much vulnerability as you can, because I think being authentic is really, really important. But if the sort of humility and vulnerability that needs to happen in order to shape who you are and let people connect to you, that to me feels like where the humility and the vulnerability come in. And so I would combine those two things, or three things really, I guess. And that feels like a recipe for more growth, more success, more happiness, more connection.
Love it. And we all want and need that. We really do. This whole putting on airs of being somebody that we're not is not helpful.
Well, and I dream about letting, especially girls, I mean, I'm probably a little biased because I have a daughter, but I am a woman, but especially girls, I dream of letting that be the foundation from which they build their own sense of self and their own sense of self-respect and confidence, and some of the things that I think are just so critical to our own health, our own mental health, our own physical health even. So that's my real dream, is to kind of get to girls a little earlier than their professional journey, and start really at a little bit younger age tapping into some of this goodness, because to me is where we're really going to see a needle shift. And that's my hope.
I love it. I do think this is the good stuff. It really is the stuff that we need more of, and we'll need this for years and years to come. I don't think this ever gets old. And it still like makes the hair stand on my arm. So yeah.
No, I know. It's
that
still
for many too.
As exciting as ever, right? So
well, this has been so good. I'm so glad that I just grabbed you and said, come on here. I think our listeners will learn so much. And so I really appreciate you.
What a pleasure. So much fun to talk to you. And thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
And thanks everybody for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. Be well.